السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم. Brothers and sisters, welcome to this course on an Islamic approach to history with Sheikh Sulaiman Al-Kindi, taking place on the 21st of July 2023 here in Norwood and also online. Beginning this course to say that this will be a course that focuses on the Islamic perspective or approach to the study of history, known as epistemology. The course itself has been 2 to 2.5 hours in length. So we will start off with 1 hour, then a 5-minute break, and then we will continue. To begin with, I think our teacher for today, Sheikh Sulaiman. Sheikh Sulaiman is a graduate of Darul Ulum Fitriya in the south of Johannesburg, where I'm from. He's also a student of the late Sheikh Taha Karam, and he holds a BA honors from the University of Johannesburg. He has a keen interest in history and has written and published history as well. Inshallah. Over to you, Sheikh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can there be any indication from online participants? You can hear me clearly? You can just type a message. Anybody?
Manana, we can hear you.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah wa bihi badid. Walau abadna khayrahu shakina. Abada. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Kullama dhakru dhakirun. Salli ala Muhammad. Kullama fakhlan dhikril baqilun. Welcome one and all. Brothers and sisters, come through the cold to be here, and brothers and sisters who are participating online. One of the brothers, the organizers here at our venue, asked me now before we started, is what is this about? It's going to be a course on Islamic history. So I'll start off at that point, that from my perspective, I'm not distinguishing between something as Islamic history or non-Islamic history. For me, history is history. Obviously, there is going to be focuses on certain topic matters from each person's perspective. But what I want to get across today, inshallah, is not the topic, but the person. That your approach as a Muslim, what can you get out of history? Is it of any relevance to you? And can this affect your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So it is not for me that there is something, a division between Islamic history versus non-Islamic history. For me, rather, it is a distinction between a Muslim approaching history to benefit himself in dunya and akhirah, or approaching history, whether you're Muslim or not, from a secular perspective, from a secular angle, that's not going to benefit you in your relationship with the akhirah. To start off on something light, that we as Muslims engaging in history, this is nothing new. If we look at people, great ulama, that we normally associate with other fields, yet the reality is that from the beginning of Islam, our ulama, our imma, they have engaged in history. For example, we all know Imam al-Bukhari, rahmatullah alayh, and he's obviously famous for his Sahih. He's famous as a muhaddith. Imam Bukhari has also written 3 Ta'rikh books, Al-Kabir, Al-Awsat, and Al-Asghar. So the Imams of the past, they had a holistic approach to knowledge, and specifically history was not excluded from their purview and how it can benefit them and the Ummah at large. Ibn Kathir rahmatullah alayh is famous for his tafsir. Ibn Kathir rahmatullah alayh is also famous for authoring Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, a great compendium on history. And as the name implies, from the beginning and the end, he aimed to cover events from the beginning of the creation of man, coming down to future events as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had foretold. Then there is Ibn Hajar rahmatullah alayh. Obviously the ulama in the audience know this name. Laymen might not know Hajar rahmatullah alayh, but Ahmad ibn Hajar rahmatullah alayh, also a great muhaddith. He is compiled many writings, but most famously Fath al-Bari, the most famous commentary on Bukhari. But Ibn Hajar rahmatullah alayh, he also stated as a muhaddith, from the perspective of muhaddith, that breaks in chains of narrators. We know when a hadith is narrated, it's narrated through a chain of narrator, that so-and-so narrated to us from so-and-so, going back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this sanad, or chains of narrators, Ibn Hajar says, breaks in chains of narrators are discovered by knowing that the narrators did not meet. Thus, there is a need to know history. Ibn Jawzi, also a famous alim, well known amongst ulama circles. Those who do not know him, lives in Baghdad, the senior of the Hanbali madhab. And he stated, a faqih must have knowledge of other sciences as well, not just fiqh. And then he specifically mentions of these sciences, history. So it is part of our tradition from our Imam since the beginning of Islam, although for various reasons, history hasn't gained such importance and such prominence. And in the greater pictures, it is understandable. Fiqh, tafsir, hadith is more important. But that does not mean that our ulama of the past did not engage in history, did not study history and see benefit in that. Just on one little side note, that Ibn al-Jawzi, when he mentions that faqih needs to be knowledgeable of other sciences, have a great amount of general knowledge as well. But he specifically mentions history. A point that I would like to bring out from this is how the studying of history creates humility in a person. That as an alim, you come to realize also how limited our scope is, how limited it is that we actually know. So for example, studying tafsir, studying hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where it becomes trendy for people to pick up translations, which in itself is not an issue, but to give a fatwa and give a tafsir through translations and feel that the translation does not require any further input from the original sources of Islam. Whereas the Arabic language itself needs explanation and Arabic changes. There are occasions where Sahaba would say that we do not understand what this word means. Now, Islam, starting Quran being revealed 14 centuries ago. Does anybody in the audience know what is the oldest song in English? That is the oldest poem. However, is the oldest poem in English. The oldest song in English is Sumer Asakaman. Around the dates back to the around about the year 1250. 1250, if we know our history, is 8 years before anybody in the audience knows, 8 years before which major event in the history of Islam? Yes, the fall of Baghdad was in 1258. So quite close, this oldest song in English, Sumer as a common in. Anybody in the audience, physical or online, would you be able to tell me Sumer as a common in? This is an English song. What does it mean? I'll write it out here on the let me write it on the board also. 1 second. Anybody wants to take wants to translate that from English to English? What does that Sumer as a common in? What does that mean? I guess. Okay, Maulana Ridwan has guessed summer is coming in, which is the expected translation, but it is incorrect. 800 years ago in English, the word summer meant spring, not summer. So Sumer as a coming in means spring is coming. This is our own language. 1250. I'm just trying to give you a perspective that in the year 1250, Islam is already 600 years old. Our major books of fiqh, tafsir, hadith, all have already been compiled. So that is the oldest English song, and an English-speaking person today who does not translate this correctly without the knowledge, knowing that the word summer 800 years ago meant spring, meant something else completely different. How then is it possible for us to just pick up a hadith book, a tafsir book, the Quran, and for us to claim complete understanding without going through the proper channels? So history gives us this perspective of how language changes, perspective changes, geography changes. Our brother, it was in my last year, I spoke on the history of the Muslims in Russia. I also explained there, for example, how 1,000 years ago, Bulgaria, who is not in the Balkans, Eastern Europe today, I don't have the map now, but Bulgaria 1,000 years ago was deep in what is the middle of Russia. There isn't time to explain how that happened, but This is the kind of perspective that history gives you of how things changes. So when Ibn al-Jawzi says that the faqih must have knowledge of other sciences like history, the ulama of the past, whether it is Mufassirun like Ibn Kathir, whether it is Muhaddithun like Ibn Hajar, Imam Bukhari, or the Fuqaha like Ibn al-Jawzi, history was not left in complete isolation, but history is often a tool for the other Islamic sciences. It's not left in separation and this dichotomy that this is separate and this doesn't affect me. A famous example is the ruling on water being contaminated with impurity. So to generalize and not go into a thick discussion, that if a small quantity of impurity falls into a large quantity of water, the water is still regarded as pure if the qualities do not change. But if a small quantity of impurity falls into a small quantity of pure water, that pure water is now contaminated, cannot be drunk, cannot be used for wudu. The issue the fuqaha had is in defining what is the distinction between large and small quantity of water. This was not very explicit from the hadith sources. The Hanafi madhab in particular use historical change, not hadith change, but history change, chains of Imam Waqidi to define what will be regarded as out of water, 10 by 10, versus what is a smaller quantity. There are obviously other discussions and other elements to the discussion, but just in terms of the use of history that the fuqaha did engage with in finalizing this ruling. Obviously, I realize this is a discussion on history, not on fiqh, so I'm not going to go into in-depth when I generalize. Maulana. What is the benefit of studying history through the lens of Iman? Anybody from the audience? Why have you come? What do you hope to gain? What is your interest in history? Just one to get the ball rolling. Okay. Alhamdulillah. Uncle says lessons from the past. And this is what the Quran says. Allah says in Surah Hud, كُلًّا نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. Allah addressing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that whatever we have narrated to you, min anba'i rusul, of the stories, of the histories of those Anbiya who have come before, is for what purpose? Ma nuthabbitu bihi fu'adak, to strengthen your heart. Fu'adak in the singular form. And Allah is addressing Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But obviously, as ummatis, we can understand that if Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the greatest of all creation, the closest unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if there's benefit for Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to be engaging in history, hearing the stories of the past, and this has a spiritual effect on the heart, that the heart of Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam can find strength in hearing the stories of the past, surely to a greater extent, we imperfect human beings, we can also gain strength in our hearts, whether it is the Rasul, as mentioned in this ayah, studying the stories of Nuh alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam, whichever Nabi it might be, stories of the Sahaba, the pious, or even I would, as we, I hope it can become clear as we discuss this further on, even what we term as secular, that what has this got to do with Islam? I firmly believe that in studying through the lens of Iman, something that is, say secular, what has this got to do with Islam? Whether it's the French Revolution, the American Revolution, whether it's the Sumerians, whatever it might be, if approached with the correct lens of Iman, this can also draw us closer to Allah. This can also strengthen our hearts. It all depends not on the topic, I think, so much. I think it more depends on you. How are you going to approach it? With what is your niyyah and your outlook in life? Of course, at the bare minimum, I think it is compulsory upon every believer, if nothing else, that you study up history, is to study the seerah, the biography of Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is a tragic scenario that today we know so much about everything and anybody, celebrities, people who sing, people who kick a ball. We know their biographical details. But Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we don't have to say this as a Muslim, we can say this completely from a secular academic level, completely honestly, that there is no personality in the history of mankind who has such a detailed record of his life as Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That Imam Tirmidhi rahmatullah alayhi tells us the amount of white hairs that was on the head of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I don't know how much white hairs there is on my own head. Never mind historical figures. You can be an absolute fanatical communist, but do you know how many white hairs there is on the head of Karl Marx? You can be an absolutely fanatical scientist and believing in evolution, but how much do you really know of the life of Darwin? Whoever it is that your historical idol, hero might be, but whoever he is, there is more details available to us of the most blessed biography, Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it is a great tragedy that we don't do that effort to know and get to know Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Never mind other details of our history. So one approach as a bookman in studying history is, as the Quran says, the benefit of strengthening our hearts. This comes from studying history, but allow Gael emphasize, but through the lens of Iman. If not with the lens of Iman, history can be, it's just a facts and figures, and it can even depress you what is happening. But as I wish to show you, inshallah, history can be part of our connection with Allah. It only depends on us. So now, the most important of our actions as mu'minin, after Iman, the second pillar of Islam, our salah. In our salah, where we recite Suratul Fatiha. Again, various rulings on there, which I won't go into. But again, as a side note, a person who continuously studies history, inshallah, gains a broader perspective, a holistic approach to his deen, without abandoning his own principles. So just by way of example, I follow the Shafi'i madhab. But in mentioning now about Surah Al-Fatiha, I'm not going to impose my ruling and mention Salah according to the Shafi'i madhab. What is the ruling of Surah Fatiha? My wording is carefully crafted that Surah Al-Fatiha is part of our Salah. I'm not going into any details, and no mu'min, no Muslim can have a dispute with that. Rather, if I had to be very specific. So it all depends on our approach. Is our approach very individualistic? Is it only based on my geography and my ethnicity? Or is my approach based on me being a Muslim trying to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So some people will only study one country and certain biographies and certain eras, and they are no different than from a South African studying Jan van Riebeeck, an Afrikaner saying Jan van Riebeeck was a great man, versus an Egyptian saying Salahuddin was a great man. What is your intention? You are being nationalistic, very narrow-minded about it, and your intention is not to approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how we approach can be very divisive, or it can be a way of uniting the ummah. And as an ummah, what is our heritage? And as an ummah, how can we use these as tools in realizing who is our creator? So for example, the Ottomans and the Crusades, these are two very popular topics. So someone with a narrow perspective can approach the Ottomans that these were the best Hanafis ever. Look what the Hanafis have accomplished. As someone approaching as a Muslim, that this is part of our Islamic history. This is part of our Islamic heritage, that the Ottomans were leaders of Islam, irrespective of what language they spoke, irrespective of which madhab they followed. The Crusades, a person with a narrow perspective. I'm from Egypt. Salahuddin led the Crusades, led the jihad against the Crusaders from Egypt. That's a very nationalistic approach. Salahuddin was a Shafi'i. Look what the Shafis contribute. How does that benefit anything? Alternatively, this is part of the Islamic heritage. People of all madhahib, Salahuddin led, whether he was a Shafi, but people from far off Morocco were Malikis, they came and they answered the call for the jihad against the Crusaders. It was a collective effort of the Ummah. The entire Ummah engaged together. But there are people who portray Salahuddin as a very singular, divisive figure. But that is their problem. Our approach is that we are slaves of Allah. We are Ummatis of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this Ummah consists of various nationalities, various languages, and it is Allah's system that Allah has united us all under the banner of Islam it is for us to choose which lens we are going to choose this. So getting back to Surah Al-Fatiha, Imam Tabari, another great Mufassir, when we say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, all praise belongs to Allah. I'm just giving a general translation, which I don't fully agree with, but all praise belongs to Allah, Lord of the worlds. These worlds, simplest tafsir, which is generally given, is that Alameen means humans and jinn. Imam Tabari, however, brings about the question that if Alameen is in the plural form, but human and jinn, that is two species. So why is it in a plural form when Allah is speaking of, when the tafsir mentions only two species, but the grammar of the ayah is for plural. So Imam Tabari says, fine, it is two species, but two species of every century, qarn, and zaman, and every era. So Allah is the Lord of the humans of this era, the humans of the previous era, humans of the far thousands of years ago era, the jinn of this era, the jinn of the near past, the jinn of the past, of the future. And in that way you have a multitude and a plural. But obviously, to understand this, that every time we're going to recite Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, and we focus on this tafsir, implicit in this is that we have a recognition of history. Because without there being a history, this tafsir doesn't make any sense. That Allah is the Lord of all both species of every era throughout history. Throughout history is what? Classically, if you take the Jewish purview, history is about 5,500 years. Humanity will end 6,000 years, they say. We're running out in about 300 years, according to the Jews. If we take what the scientists say, we're talking about a few, that mankind, 100,000 years, life is how many billion years, what it is that scientists say. From Islamic perspective, Ibn Kathir, rahmatullah alayh, whom we have already mentioned, states that humans, so even if we take just the humans of being 6,000 years, which is also quite a small number and completely unrealistic. If we take that the Quran mentions that Nuh alayhi salam preached for, gave da'wah for 950 years, which is not his lifespan before he became a Nabi, and does not include also his lifespan after the flood. So Nuh alayhi salam alone, his lifespan is way beyond 950 years. So if we just take Nuh alayhi salam in isolation, it is completely illogical to confine human history to a mere 6,000 years. But Nuh alayhi salam himself then covers 1/6 of the entire history of mankind. So the 6,000 years that the Jews give us, and which some people have added into Islam, it does not make sense from a Quranic perspective. In any case, if we go back, Nuh alayhi salam, the creation of mankind, of Adam alayhi salam, who himself lived well over a century, the Mufassirin agree that when Allah created our father Adam alayhi salam, the angels protested that How can you create something that's going to be spilling blood? But the question arises that Allah alone is Alimul Ghaib. Allah alone knows the future. If this is the first time something like this happens, that Allah has created an intelligent being to inhabit the earth, where does this protest come from? That the angels were upset that we have certain reservations about this. It is because humans were not the first species. Before the humans, the jinn inhabited the earth, and they spread corruption on the earth. Angels were sent to battle them, and then once they were removed, then we as humans, we replaced the jinn. However, Ibn Kathir says it was not only a once-off thing, because if it was a once-off thing, that it was one species that did something wrong, the angels can't formulate that as a permanent policy. No, one species did something wrong, so we feel Allah should never ever create another species just because one species, the jinn, did wrong, so Allah should never create ever again. Now, Ibn Kathir says it goes much further beyond that. This happened several times, that before the jinn, there was the hen and the bin. We have no details on what exactly are the hen and the bin, because it's going far, far beyond to the beginning of time. Were the hen and the bin, are these two separate species? Is the collective name for one species? Is it only a figure of speech that there were several continuous species before the jinn? Allah knows best. But the point is that all this is within the ambit of Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Allah, the Lord of all species, throughout history, of every era, of every century. And if you consider this, that how long is human history? And before that, we had replaced the species, who had replaced the species. It goes way, way back, that we do have absolutely no knowledge of, no possible understanding of. Allah alone has full understanding of what is the full implications of this. But what I would suggest is that at least once, upon recitation of Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, just think about this and how small we are and in how great Allah is, and Allah is Rabb of all that. I'm not saying that every ayat in full salah must be history, but just once it gives us some kind of perspective of how we can't have full perspective. Just on a side note, that this kind of things that our ulama have mentioned 1,000 years ago. Recently, it is not taken very seriously, but a discussion has opened up amongst Western scientists. It is called the Silurian hypothesis. Let me write it here. Silurian. Let me write it on the board. 1 second. You want to check it out. It is just as a very, very new discussion among scientists that, according to them, they say that, look here, mankind is about a few 100,000 years. It took us so long. In that time, we developed intelligence, first of all, language, technology, in a relatively short time, whereas dinosaurs were there for millions of years. And the fossil record that we have is actually like about only 1% very few fossils actually remain. So the discussion amongst Western scientists, it's not a very serious, very in-depth discussion yet, but it has begun. I'm just drawing a parallel with what even Kathir has said, is that they have raised the question that since we have almost nothing survives. All these wood tables, my laptop, even plastic that takes thousands of years to disintegrate. But when we're talking about millions of years, things do not survive. So they say that dinosaurs, whatever creatures that were there before humans, had millions of years. Did they develop intelligence? Did they develop language? Did they develop technology? I don't know. Doesn't affect me directly. But just as a point of comparison, that Islamically, that we know that before humans, there were species upon species who were intelligent, who rebelled against Allah and were replaced. I'm not saying that they were dinosaurs, but whatever, because we have absolutely no idea what's in and what has been and mean, whatever it is, what they were. But very often we'll find this kind of discussions mentioned in our kutub only being discussed recently amongst Western scientists. When we come to Imam Qurtubi later, inshallah, I'll mention something on similar lines. You can remind me if I forget. So our perspective on as Muslims in studying history, we strengthen our heart. We gain a perspective of who our Rabb is, that how small we are in terms of geography, in terms of time, how small are we? Surah Al Imran 191. الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم يتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض. Allah describes pious servants who tafakkur, who ponder over the creation of heaven and earth. So we can ponder what a nice tree that is, look at the heavens, look at the stars. There has to be a creator. رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. Oh Allah, you have not created this in vain. سُبْحَانَكَ وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. Gaining a recognition of Allah, whether it is through astronomy, whether it is through biology, whatever science, going back again to the quote of Ibn al-Jawzi, rahmatullahi, which I mentioned before. So, two things. One is, any science can be a means of recognizing Allah if done through the correct approach. And that is the purpose of knowledge, to gain recognition of Allah. Everything else is secondary, even if you have a good intention. But your primary intention, including history, is to gain recognition of Allah. When I used to give Juma at the universities, I used to give an example out of other examples. Like, say, for example, you are studying medicine. So some people will have an intention that I'm going to be of service unto humanity. That's a good intention, but that is not the Islamic purpose of knowledge. Or I'll become rich and I'll donate a lot to the needy. That's also a good intention, but that is not the purpose of your knowledge. What is the purpose of knowledge? And now specifically, for example, medicine, is that the Quran mentions banana, fingertip, gaining the recognition of looking at the fingertip, that there has to be an Allah creator behind this fingertip. How is it then possible that we go through 7 years of studying medicine, the full human body from top to toe, and not seeing that there is a hand of Allah, creator behind it? That is the purpose of knowledge, that whatever I see, whatever I hear, is through the lens of Iman, that there has to be a creator. So how does this fit in with history? Fine, I can examine astronomy and see this greater, biology there's a greater, whatever other science, but history there is a, how is this even a creation? Allah speaks about the creation of the heavens and the earth. Something that very few people understand is that time, zaman, is also creation of Allah. It is easy for us to understand that an animal, an insect, plant, star, sun, the moon, these physical things that we can see, grasp, or hear, these are creations of Allah. But what very few people understand is that zaman, time, is also creation of Allah. Just like He created the air and the oxygen for me to breathe in for humanity's sake, Allah also created zaman, time, for us to live in. And Allah is above time. So very often we get these kind of questions that, how can it be Laylatul Qadr on a Thursday here but a Friday in Makkah? These kind of questions arise from people who impose zaman over Allah. Allah is the Khaliq of zaman. Allah created zaman. You cannot impose zaman upon Allah. Zaman is imposed upon us. We live in zaman. Zaman is a creation. And we need to understand that the only absolute is Allah. So time, being a creation of Allah, is very fluid. We think of it time as being something constant. But time is attached the way Allah wants it to be in this world versus barzakh versus the akhirah. Time passes in different ways, in different places. It is not a constant that if 10 minutes passes here and 10 minutes also has to pass in America. This is our understanding as humans. But we need to understand that Allah is above all this and how Allah has created time to pass in different places at different times. That is Allah's decision. We have many incidents, particularly in books of the Tasawwuf. A certain person went into the world of the jinn, for example, or other spiritual realm, and he returns after a week, for example, back to our realm. He spent a week in the other alam, the spiritual realms. But when he came back to this world, 20 years had passed. This is a very common phenomenon recorded in our kutub of such kind of things. For example, Surah Al-Kahf mentions Musa alayhi salam, his interaction with Khidr alayhi salam, which is called slave, the abd. And I use the word slave. We are not servants of Allah. I did not sign a contract with Allah that I can terminate my contract with one to. I am a slave of Allah. I'm not a servant of Allah. So Allah mentions the slave, this abd, Khidr alayhi salam. He is assigned what is in Arabic called the taqween. You can just say the organization of how the Anbiya and the pious interact in the world. And this included the story of Musa alayhi salam being the great Nabi, one of the greatest Anbiya. But there were certain things, and unless it was explained to him that Musa alayhi salam understand the examiner, how Allah was setting out the system until Khidr alayhi salam explained. So Khidr alayhi salam had great understanding of how Allah sets out organization of certain things. And he was assigned as a tutor to Anbiya and Awliya. One of his Awliya asked Khidr alayhi salam that, tell me something amazing, astounding. You have lived so many centuries on that lifespan and you've seen so many things. Tell me something astounding. So Khidr alayhi salam says, you know what? You take a seed, you cut it open, there's nothing inside. That same seed, you plant it, and then a tree sprouts. There will be hundreds of seeds, each one sprouting, and there are all these leaves and all these twigs that wasn't in there, and a forest can come from that one seed. Isn't that amazing? As Wally says, that is amazing, but that's something I could have thought about myself. Tell me something from your perspective that's utterly amazing. Khidr alayhi salam mentioned, all my travels, there's one event that astounds me till today. I was traveling and I came to this town which was surrounded by vineyards. I entered one vineyard, and the gardener was sitting there, and I asked him, can I buy a bunch of grapes? So he said, no, we have a custom that we freely give a bunch to a traveler, your first grape, your first bunch is on the house. So I took a bunch and I continued with my journey. I returned 500 years later, and the town was gone. And instead of, there was a mountain that wasn't there before. And when I went to the nearest people I could find, I asked them that, where's this town? We've never heard of this town. I said, when did this mountain come? I said, what kind of question is that? There's always a mountain some pop up. So I left very puzzled. I continued for another 500 years till I returned back to that same place and the mountain was gone. And there was a river where the mountain used to be. And I asked the people the same, where's the mountain? Said, what mountain? I was very confused. I returned another 500 years and there was a town surrounded by vineyards. I entered and I asked someone, can I buy a bunch of grapes? And the person replied, we told you just yesterday that we don't charge travelers. Why are you asking us again? And Khidr alayhi salam says, I haven't grasped the reality of what happened at this place up till today. So to use modern terms that today is entering Western science fiction, Mufassirin, especially people like, in particular Imam Qurtubi, wrote about such kind of phenomena, different worlds, that today they are speaking, that they use the terms dimensions, parallel universe, things that our ulama wrote about centuries ago, that there are different worlds that is not crossed over through physically traveling, that somehow there's other worlds that Allah has created, and where time passes in a different way. So that way, for Khidr alayhi salam's perspective, one day had passed here on earth, but on that spot, there was 3 different worlds that 500 years times 3 had passed. 1,500 years had passed, whereas one day had passed here on earth. The point is, I can't explain this fully, and host ulama that have consulted on such things, it's not things that easily grasped. But what we can grasp is this, and what we should understand is that time is a creation. Time is very fluid. It is not fixed. That is a clock ticking. So that means that 1 minute has passed here, that 1 minute has passed throughout Allah's creation. Allah has created time for His system, how He wants to. So once we understand this, that time is a creation, that time is not a constant over and above Allah, that Allah is above time, then it also gives us this greater perspective that just as I study a plant and can see that there's a Allah, in the same way, if I study time and the passing of time, which we call history, I should able, if I look at it, at historical events through this perspective, I am fulfilling this command in Surah Al Imran of pondering over the creation of Allah. This includes the study of history. It's not something we normally consider because we don't normally consider time to be a creation. Every science, depending on how our outlook in life is, can draw us closer to Allah. The famous example of Imam Sibwe, that the ancient Arabs, they spoke Arabic naturally. There was no need for them to have dictionaries and grammar books. When Islam spread, it became a problem because why are you saying this? Allahu, Allah, Allah, He. Why? What's the difference? We don't understand. So grammar books had to be written, but it was the Persians who took this task. One of these was Imam Sibwe, who in his youth did not know a word of Arabic. He completely had to study Arabic from scratch. He became an Imam of Arabic, and up till today, his textbooks are used by Arabs today, but he was a Persian. One of the discussion, these Persian grammarians, ethnically Persian, but grammarians of Arabic, that one of their discussions was, what is the most common noun in Arabic? So there's various opinions. One is whom, they, why did they do that? Why are they so corrupt? They, in every language, they is a very common noun. Others said shay, thing. Everything can be called a thing, shay. So shay has to be the most common noun. Then the discussion was on what is the most proper noun in all of Arabic? What is that noun that is absolute, that cannot, it is not shared? And the general consensus amongst the grammarians was it is the word ana, I. Because I am I, Maulana Anwar is I to himself, Maulana Ridwan is I. Each one is an I that cannot be shared. Imam Sibwe said, no, you are wrong. Because even ana is not absolute. Although I am I to myself, if there are 10 people in a room, that constitutes ana 10 times. So I said, A'araful Ma'arif, the absolute most proper noun in all of Arabic, Allahu A'araful Ma'arif. Allah is the most absolute proper noun in Arabic, Wahdahu la sharika lahu. Absolutely, there is no sharing in the word Allah. A very dry subject, grammar, in any language, even Arabic, it's not the most exciting. I'm so excited to discuss Arabic grammar. But the issue, what I'm pointing out is, whichever science, Imam Sibwe didn't just look at the Arabic as just a knowledge, but through the perspective of Iman. So even through a grammatical rule, Imam Sibwe drew closer to Allah. And who knows, that might be the one thing that most pleases Allah for the Imam to enter Jannah through Arabic grammar. So that kind of perspective we need to take in studying history as a mu'min. Another ayah on how we should approach history as believers. In Surah Sajda, يدبر الأمر من السماء إلى الأرض ثم يعرج إليه في يوم كان مقداره ألف سنة مما تعدون. In summary, Allah issues His decree, and the fulfillment of that decree is over a period of 1,000 years. Mufassirin like Imam Qurtubi, Imam Alusi, they infer upon this that Allah decrees that a certain event will take place in 1,000 years. Allah issues that decree 1,000 years before that, and then there will be asbab, a certain thread and means that if you come on the, obviously every event, there has to be an event before that that brought that event to happen. But in terms of examining the history of Islam, we see that Allah passes a decree and we follow a thread. Then we gain recognition that it is like an artwork, that we cannot, obviously, we are not consultants with Allah. We are not knowing what is Allah's plans. But again, just as we see how long history is, how great time is, how great geography is, Allah is Lord of all that. But when we examine the thread, that this took 1,000 years and Allah knew and Allah planned, that how great is my Creator. So we are not mushir, we are not consultants with Allah. So to even give an example of something like this happening over 1,000 years, I don't think that is appropriate. But in terms of as a mind exercise, and I'm not imposing Allah that Allah did this, this is definitely this, but as a perspective of studying history and within the tafsir that Imam Qurtubi gave us, the conquest of Makkah, Mukarramah, which took place in the 8th year of the Hijrah. Oh, we've done an hour now. Let's take a break now. Okay, so we'll continue with this after the break. At least 5 minutes. Brothers need more than that. Let me know. So we'll pause now. 11:20. We'll start at 11:20, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are resuming. So we are mentioning about how Allah passes a decree, and there will be a thread, the asbab that Allah, the means that Allah has set in place for a decree to come to fulfillment 1,000 years later. So just to again reiterate, I'm not saying this is definitely any kind of such example. It will be, I mean, very, very inappropriate for me to say this. See, Allah did. I don't like to say Allah did this because this. But this is for our purposes as a mind exercise, and Allah knows best. So, for example, the conquest of Makkah took place in the 8th year of the Hijrah. I prefer to say and also write of the Hijrah or Hijri. Just as a little side note, in many of our books, copying the Western style, our writers will state AH. And people don't know how to read that. then they'll say also AH, or if they read it out, then they will say after Hijrah, which is completely wrong. What does AH actually mean? It's actually Latin Anno Hijrah, year of the Hijrah. It's taken from the Western dating system. They will write AD, Anno Domini, year of our Lord, meaning Isa alayhi salam. So some writers, English Muslim writers, copied AH from AD. So it's Latin Anno Hijrah, year of the Hijrah. And to say after Hijrah is completely wrong. Obviously, if you think about it logically, why is it wrong? Because when did the Hijrah take place? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam lived on the last or the second last day of Safar of that year. And then that year became counted as the first year of the Hijrah. So if AH means after Hijrah, so let's say an event that took place in the Muharram of that year. That Muharram was before the Hijrah. So if I say Muharram 1 AH, that is Muharram of the year 1 of the Hijrah, but it's not Muharram after Hijrah, because that Muharram is before the Hijrah. So obviously, logically, besides the fact that the word is Latin, it means something else. Even logically, people who read or translate AH as after Hijrah is completely wrong. So to avoid that, when I write something, first I use in the first year of the Hijrah or Hijri. I don't use this AH because people don't understand the AH. In any case, conquest of Makkah, 8 Hijri, or if you prefer AH. What is the immediate event that we can see with human understanding that caused the conquest of Makkah? And Allah in His knowledge knows best the absolute reality. Was the Banu Bakr, allied to the Quraysh, had attacked the Khuza'a tribe, who were allied to the Muslims. I'll repeat, who were allied to the Muslims. Many people having a very cursory understanding of history, just read 1-2 sentences and then give a talk on, and then they will say that the Quraysh attacked the Muslims. It wasn't the Quraysh, it was the Banu Bakr allied to the Quraysh, to the Banu Bakr allied to the Quraysh, number one. And number two is the Khuza'a were not Muslims. They might have been Muslims amongst them, definitely they are Khuzai Sahaba, but at that point in time, they were simply a tribe allied to the Muslims. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah had allowed any tribe to join any side, whether you are Muslim or not. So, by the Khuza'a had been attacked, they were the allies of the Muslims, so this broke the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And then this, because the treaty had been broken, this led now to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam summoning the Muslims, marching on Makkah and conquering Makkah. So taking one step back from the conquest of Makkah, since we have this Khuza'a being the immediate cause leading to the conquest of Makkah, we have to take a step back and then ask that they were allied to the Muslims. The question is then, why were they allied to the Muslims? What is the step before that that led to them being allied to the Muslims when they were not an entirely Muslim tribe? In any case, not that they were all Muslims or Sahaba, so naturally they joined. That is not the reason the Khuza'a joined with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as an ally. So when the different tribes were deciding, should we join the Quraysh or should we join with the Muslims? For the Khuza'a, things were pretty equal. They had no practical reason to either join the Quraysh or to join the Muslims. What was the deciding factor for them was that if we go back into the lineage of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the son of Abdullah, who is the son of Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib is actually not the name. It is actually the nickname. His real name was Shayba. Shayba, the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, used to be the chief of the Quraysh of Makkah in his lifetime during the childhood of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But when Shayba Abdul Muttalib was young, an outsider called Nawfal had what we call today a coup. He overthrew Abdul Muttalib and he took over Makkah. Everybody's looking for allies. Abdul Muttalib makes allies with the same Khuza'a tribe, and they fight on his behalf, and they brought Abdul Muttalib back in control of Makkah. So because of that event that took place 2 generations before that, the Khuza'a felt that this is the grandson of that same man that we are allies with, that we know. Everything else being equal, let's support Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, grandson of our ally. So the events of 2 generations before led to Khuza'a at Hudaybiyah joining with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then that treaty being broken led to the conquest of Makkah. So now take a step back. When Abdul Muttalib approached the Khuza'a, help me, let's kick this Nawfal guy out of Makkah. Why did the Khuza'a support him instead of Nawfal? So we went to the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. To answer that, we have to go then to the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abdul Muttalib is the son of Hashim. It's also a nickname. And Hashim is the son of Abd Manaf. His father was Qusay, which is now about 200 years now. We're talking about 200 years before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born. When Qusay was born, the same tribe as Khuza'a, they were the rulers of, not the Quraysh. The chief, Hulayl, the chief of the Khuza'a, the chief of Makkah, his name was Hulayl. He had a daughter called Hubba. Hubba married this Qusay, who is the great-great-great-grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we can see the lineage of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam now joins with the Khuza'a tribe. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's blood includes the Khuza'a. So Qusay then had a son called Abd Manaf, who is the great-grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the same Qusay is the son-in-law of chief of Makkah. And so in the year 440 AD, he takes over Makkah. So now, this answers the question again, that when Abdul Muttalib was in trouble and he went to the Khuza'a for help against Nawfal, the only reason that, no, it wasn't their fight, this is Quraysh versus Nawfal, what's got to do with us? The only reason why they got involved was that This Abdul Muttalib, he is our great-grandson. Why shouldn't we support him against this outsider? So going back to 200-300 years to the marriage of Qusay, the marriage of Qusay led to the Khuza'a supporting the civil war which happened then generations later in Makkah, which led them to joining the Muslims at Hudaybiyah, which led to the conquest of Makkah. Now we go further back to that. Even before Qusay was even born, this Khuza'a, they were ruling Makkah for 200 years. If you go another 200 years before that, they weren't in Makkah. They were just passing by and they decided to Allah mentions in the Quran, Saba people. One of their punishments was they had a great dam in Yemen, the Saba, the people of Yemen, they had a great dam in Yemen, which the country depended upon, and Allah destroyed this Ma'rib dam. It's called the Ma'rib dam. When this dam Allah destroyed, many of the tribes of Yemen, they had to flee Yemen. One of these tribes which split part of the tribe was the Az tribe, and they had 3 branches. One of the 3 branches was the Banu Uthman. The other 2 branches continued further north and they settled where Medina is today, and they are called, we famously know them as the Aus and the Khazraj, the Ansar of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But this Banu Uthman, they split from their cousins. They stopped at Makkah and they conquered Makkah. And because they split from the cousins called them Khuza'a, splitters. And so they conquered Makkah and they ruled Makkah for 200 years. And their daughter got married into the
Let's go.
entire thread that goes back 600 years. The dam splits, the Khuza'a move, the Khuza'a rule, Khuza'a marry their daughter to the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then because of that, next step is because of the previous that they support Abdul Muttalib. Next, because of that, 2 generations later, they sign a treaty with the Muslims of alliance. And next, because of that, the way is opened for the conquest of Makkah. So again, it will be very inappropriate of me to say that this is the way Allah planned it. But as a mind exercise, that these are the facts that we have recorded in our history. This is common thread, the Khuza'a coming from Yemen 600 years, Khuza'a, until Makkah is conquered. So how Allah planned it or not, but on a physical level that we can see, this was the means. The dam broke, 600 years later, Makkah is conquered. And Allah knows best, He is planning.
Relevancy, history.
Say again?
Relevancy, history.
Relevance of history, but seeing it with the eyes of Iman, not just facts. A German Orientalist can also write about this, and he can also present facts, but he won't see Allah in that. We see this and we say that Allah is the best of planning. Practical ramifications of history. We take Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun, in many ways, in the Western sphere, is regarded as a father of the science of history. What do we mean by this? We're not saying that history didn't exist or historians did not exist before Ibn Khaldun. But generally speaking, before Ibn Khaldun, historians were no better than recorders of chronicles, that this happened, this happened, this happened. There, take it. The difference of Ibn Khaldun is that what he brought into the world in a very systematic way, there were people who offered some kind of insight before, but in a very systematic way, Ibn Khaldun offered us that study history in a systematic way and draw theories and systems from there and knowledge from there, not just facts that this happened and the sequence, but what can we conclude. So even Western historians acknowledge the contributions of a Muslim historian, Ibn Khaldun, rahmatullah alayh, who was originally from North Africa, Northwest Africa. One of the essays that, shall we say, that he wrote on, or theories that he proposed, is the 4-generation system. Ibn Khaldun, he noticed this practically and then he put it to right. What is very common in Islam is that because in Islam that we don't judge based on race, based on class, but anybody can arise in the Islamic State. There were times when so many slaves ruled, became the sultans, particularly in India, in Egypt, the Mamluks. So in this kind of process, Ibn Khaldun noticed that someone from a very low background, it can be a shepherd, it can be a soldier, whatever, correct circumstances, Allah's will, of course, reaches the very top, becomes the wazir, becomes the sultan, becomes the king. Happened over and over in the history of Islam. But it says, what happens after that? That guy is completely right at the bottom. He struggled and he know what he went through, and it created a certain mindset and perspective of struggle and appreciation. His children were also there. They were also born in that tent in the desert, whatever, and they also went through that struggle. They became the princes, and they didn't do that struggle like the father, but they witnessed, and there was something to it. And that also affected their lifestyle. They would still have an appreciation, how to treat the poor, how to treat the common people, because our father came from this. How can we ill-treat you and treat you like a dog and this? We know better than you. An appreciation and a way of living. Our father was no better than you. The next generation, the 3rd generation, never saw any of that. For them, it's now just stories. Yes, our grandfather said this, my mother said this. Like a fairy tale, like, oh, you lived with a day without food. Shame, shame, shame. Okay, that never ever happened to us. And, your clothing, whatever. All it's the stories by the time you come to the 3rd generation, but they're still kind of good kings because they've come from a line of good kings. By the time you come to the 4th generation, it's completely the end. Now that is now Hansel and Gretel. It's not history anymore. It's completely gone. We don't understand this. We got nothing to do with this. We are the kings. You are the common people. We will live what we want to. We just got to spend the money, and we're not going to be serving the people. And they become completely corrupt. Sense of reality is completely gone. they become inept. And if not them, at the very latest, the 5th generation will be overthrown. It will be then time for someone else who has a sense of reality, who wants to serve the people, that they will overthrow this family. We'll have 3 generations of good people, a corruption at the 4th, and at the 4th or 5th generation, that family will be gone. So one is to see it just academically, that what have Muslims contributed to the science of history, but again, practically, when our ulama such as Ibn Khaldun point out these principles of Muslim history, is it just to sit in the book and just mention in the bayan or program, or is there anything practical to that? Sorry to offend, but also not sorry if I'm going to offend. But this is something that I think is very much applicable to us in South Africa. Very similar amount of generations we're talking about in terms of Indians in particular, Indian Muslims in South Africa. As it mentioned in his Juma Bayan yesterday. Indian Muslims coming to this country with nothing, owning nothing, but through effort of deen and dunya, they worked, they earned something, and they set up systems for our deen. And that was 4 or 5 generations ago. There's no sense of reality today's generations of what does struggle mean, what does earning your cent mean. That today that we have teenagers who get more pocket money than ulama get salaries. Everyone for 1 year, month salaries, for more than 1 month's salary is a teenager's pocket money. They have absolutely no sense of what it is to earn, struggle. And if their father should say that what your grandfather did earn to get that, set up that little corner shop to sell that few vegetables, it is a fairy story. And again, sorry to say, I'm not wishing anybody bad. I'm not cursing anybody. I'm just certain realities, and you can challenge me if you have a perspective. But the reality is just like the dynasties that Ibn Khaldun mentioned, that they disappear because they corrupt, no sense of management. Their family gets overthrown by another family. How many of these businesses today are collapsing? How many bankruptcies are there because the great-grandson, he's got no sense of quality, got no business acumen, no struggle, no time. He's just not, because I'm the grandson, I will step in and I'm just there, and my purpose is to draw the money to buy my mansion in whatever suburb this might be, and to buy whatever car, without Lamborghini it might be. That is the purpose of how to actually sit and actually even understanding the business. It's a reality, not every family, but these very same principles Ibn Khaldun pointed out to us. And again, I'm not an ill wisher to anybody, but in terms of facts on the ground, we can draw the parallels. So this is one practical example that through the study of our history, our ulama sat, examine things, and how can we benefit? How can we be horned? How will our life be better? Here's a warning. Take it or leave it. Like everything else in life, you cannot be forced, but the knowledge is there. The effort has been done by prior ulama. Some ulama are still doing some kind of effort in this direction. If you wish to benefit, it is possible. Yes.
Calmness. Take less of good stuff. Creative.
Are we-
Find it. That's what experience. Was it a faith? Was it don't be the Khandan lasts more than by some part.
It's amazing.
Especially
It's not just the Muslims.
good point you made. Like you said again, it's people. You can't apologize. It's happening with you. Where do we go? That's a good point.
Little anecdotes I would to mention. Again, we can take it as, okay, this is a history fact, or something that for me to ponder over and examine and compare with my life and state of the Muslims today. Nations are generally mentioned, named after a geographical feature or some linguistic feature. Many nations, the name actually means nothing besides nation in their particular people in their own language. Like the Germans, Deutsch actually just means nothing besides people. Just so simple. In the history of Islam, something I find very, very fascinating. One nation is not named after ancestor or some linguistics. The Uzbeks. Where and what are the Uzbeks? Okay, we don't have 6 hours like in my Muslims in Russia workshop we had last year. But in short, when the Mongols converted to Islam, one of the greatest of these Muslim rulers of the Mongols was Uzbek Khan, Rahmatullah alayh. You should really check up on his biography. So much of his own people became Muslim. He was so deeply committed to his deen. So many of his own people, the Mongols, became Muslim because of Uzbek Khan, but that wasn't sufficient for him. He sent out people, dais, to the neighboring peoples. And to the south, those tribes who accepted Islam, it was such a complete and utter such a complete and utter commitment to this new deen. It became a new identity to them that they named themselves after Uzbek Khan, that we are now the Uzbeks. An entire nation that survives up till today. That is how they entered Islam, and that was and how the ancestors looked at it, that they so got in love with Islam with such zeal that they entered Islam, that their old identity meant nothing to them. They renamed themselves all this as we are a new nation, we are the Uzbeks, after in honor the person who had brought us Islam. Imagine what is his Qiyamah. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us, he who starts a good sunnah, a good act, so to say, that will be acted on others, he gets the same reward until the day of Qiyamah. Every act done by any Uzbek, it's all written in the account of Uzbek Khan, Rahmatullah alayh. There's a picture. So remember, Uzbek Khan, he ruled over what is Russia today. He was the Khan over No, so few Muslims know about this. Russia was subservient under the Muslim Mongols, chiefly in the time of Uzbek Khan, Rahmatullah alayh. And there's this painting by this European artist. I'm not advocating just, but certain things are reality, certain things we see in the world. This painting that he has of Uzbek Khan, when the Russians revolted against him, and the chief prince of Russia, Prince Michael, was brought as a prisoner, sitting in front of, as a prisoner in front of Uzbek Khan. Uzbek Khan is sitting and leaning on his couch. And the prince of the Russians is standing as a prisoner. The Christian prince standing as a defeated, we know how great Russia is today, but he's standing as a defeated prisoner in front of the Muslim ruler. How things have changed, how today Russia does what they want to us Muslims, be it the Chechens, be it the Tatars in the Crimea, whatever. But something also, really our minds need to change also. If you look at this picture, and again, don't misinterpret my words. Allah chooses whom He wills. There's good from every people and every nation. But what I'm talking about in terms of Islamic history, what Allah chose and what Allah implemented, and what how our mindset is today. If you look at this painting, Prince Michael is depicted as this handsome European white man, and Uzbek Khan is sitting, ugly Mongolian, with this ugly Mongolian kind of eyes. And that there's no reason to believe that that is not accurate. So what if Uzbek Khan was an ugly Mongolian, physically speaking? Allah chose him, and what is his status in the eyes of Allah? And so what if Prince Michael was a handsome white man? And obviously Allah also chooses white people, and there are many European nations with all of Islam, but that's not my point. My point is our mentality, that we are so indoctrinated by Hollywood. When Hollywood points at this is good people, they must have certain features, and this is bad people, this is certain features. This is not what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us. And why is this so ingrained? History can also help us, inshallah, fix our mindset. Look who Allah chose in the past. Did Allah look at what the facial features is and what is the skin tone? Continuing with Uzbek Khan, also another entire nation that will be in his records on the day of Qiyamah. The neighbors of the Uzbeks, the Kyrgyz. How the Kyrgyz entered Islam is so utterly amazing, and really just say subhanallah. What Allah did, how Allah planned it, Allah knows. We cannot conceptualize Allah's planning, but look at this event. Allah brought this nation into Islam. It was 300 years ago that the Russians had invaded Central Asia, Kazakhstan. Obviously, it wasn't called by those names: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, the Bukhara, Samarkand areas of those famous cities. Where the south were long-time Muslims. The Kazakhs, many people had this misunderstanding about the Kazakhs. The Kazakhs were only entering Islam at that period. So some people are quite judgmental that there was, look at kind of weak Muslims the Kazakhs became under the Russians. That's very, very unfair. They were only entering Islam at the same time the Russians were invading them. That they even stuck to Islam is an achievement in itself. But getting back to the Kyrgyz, so all these nations were generally Muslim. The Kyrgyz were not Muslims at all. Were completely surrounded by Muslims. They had their own shirk lifestyle. So now the Russians invaded them. This might sound ridiculous to you, but you're welcome to check up the facts yourself. We're talking about 300 years ago. We're not talking about the age of internet and communication. Furthermore, the Russian capital at that time was not even Moscow. It was way further westwards, what is called St. Petersburg or Leningrad at different times. So if you think about the communication, the languages, the time period, the distance, what the Russians understood that they invaded all these Muslim tribes, and now they invaded the Kyrgyz. They didn't even understand that the Kyrgyz are not Muslims, that they are mushrik. And from the administration point of view in St. Petersburg, this was now actually, but obviously they wanted to have victory, but from an administration point of view after the battles, it was actually a headache from an administration point of view that we've conquered yet another people with yet a different language and how set up. Someone came up with the idea that, you know, the Uzbeks, they have been pacified. They are no longer revolting. Let's employ Uzbeks as administrators under our employ to act as administrative officials on our behalf amongst the Kyrgyz. So they collected all these Uzbeks, right? You're under our pay, our salary, we're paying everything. Go off to administer the Kyrgyz. All these Uzbeks, Muslim Uzbeks, went to mushrik Kyrgyz, did their job, but what did they do in addition? They invited all the Kyrgyz to Islam, and the Kyrgyz embraced Islam on the hands of the Uzbek under the pay of Russia. To put it in a different way, Russia paid for the conversion of the Kyrgyz to Islam. Whereas it was illegal in Russia proper to openly practice Islam. Is this something I could have planned? Is this something any Muslim great politician or king of the time could have planned? Were there even efforts, were they even worried about the Kyrgyz? No Muslim achieved this. The Christian emperor of Russia, Allah used him, bring an entire nation who are still Muslims into Islam. So kind of what lens and what perspective am I studying my history? Is that this can just be a fact that you can read in any history book. Or can I gaze at these kind of facts and events with the eyes of Iman? This is what happened. And just as I say, subhanallah, when I look at the star and the sun and the moon, as a mu'min, this creation of history of time, looking at such an event, I must also say, subhanallah, oh Allah, what did you achieve? You willed, you decreed that this nation will enter Islam, and you did not need us Muslims. You used the kuffar to bring them into Islam. Who can challenge you? Another such an amazing example. Oman, we know today is confined to corner of Arabia, but over the centuries, Oman had an extensive empire. One direction, parts of what is Pakistan, there was under Oman. Other direction, the whole coast of East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, down. It was part of the Oman Empire. However, just like a businessman can either be a Muslim businessman, use his business for the upliftment of deen, or can just use his that, make himself rich with any care for deen. In the same way, there is nothing proud. I am nothing proud about the Oman Empire. There was nothing for the sake of deen that they conquered these places. They enslaved the people, not to say that in Sharia Islam ever banned slavery, that is not what I'm saying. But we treat people well, whether they are free, whether slaves, whether Islam has given us certain instructions which the people of Oman never did. They treat these people as dogs. And because they were Muslims, to the local people, the name of Islam stank. And this is what Islam is about. This is how you treat people. These people weren't interested in entering Islam because look what horrible people the Muslims are. Then the colonial era began. Germany was a latecomer. Only place left was to fight Oman. So the Germans declared war on Oman, and they kicked Oman out of what we call the coast of Tanzania. They kicked the Oman out. If we had no perspective that there is a Khalik who plans things and issues a decree over 1,000 years, having no understanding of history, and although it would be natural, but it would still be a history action, if we had to be at that time, we would immediately see what is it? Who are the two parties? It is the Christian German Reich versus the Muslim Sultanate of Oman. Who do we have to support, and where is the benefit of Islam? Obviously, our inclination is we need to support Oman, and we'll make dua, and everybody will kunut in all the masjids and cry and collect funds in send EFT, whatever. There was an EFT that time. But we need to support Oman. They're under attack from the Germans. Islam is being under attack. The Ottomans have already being defeated over this place, and now this place. In India, there's problems. Everywhere there's problems. Here's another problem. We need to support our brothers, my dear brothers. Let's support our brothers in Oman. And there's nothing wrong in that attitude. That's a natural attitude. But what can I see, and what does Allah see? What does Allah plan? What happened is the Germans won. Oman was kicked out. Two things started to happen. One is the Germans ended the slave trade. So this connection which the people had in their minds that Islam and Muslims equal slavery and treating people badly, that started to fade from their minds, number one. Number two is Germans came, they're good with their technology. They started building roads, railways deep into Tanzania, which wasn't possible before. And so the Muslims could also penetrate deeper in, which they couldn't do before. And they went as traders, and they called to Islam. More people entered Islam under Christian Germany than under Muslim Oman. Now, don't get me wrong. One is what Allah plans and what Allah decrees. That is a different issue from what is my responsibility as a Muslim individual. So I'm not saying that, okay, now I've become an expert in history and I predict that German victory will be good, so let's support Germany. That is not what I'm saying. As a Muslim, you still have, jihad is still compulsory, you still have to fight against the kuffar. It is a completely separate issue. What Allah plans, we don't know. But what Allah planned was the benefit for Islam lay in the defeat of the Muslims. Every defeat of Muslims is not necessarily a defeat of Islam. Through Germany, Christian Germany winning, Islam triumphed in Eastern. This kind of perspective is important for current events. We become despondent. This has happened. That has happened. Why is this happening? It's not for us to ask why. We have an individual responsibility, whatever the masala for a particular situation is, whatever the ulama say, in this situation, this is your responsibility. That is completely separate, that what appears to be bad for the Muslims is a victory that Allah has set in place. Just like Hudaybiyah, someone as strong in Iman as Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu, he immediately did not see what is the benefit of Hudaybiyah. On all the outward ways, it looked like a defeat for the Muslims. Imam Zuhri rahmatullah alayhi writes that during the peace that existed in the 2 years of Hudaybiyah, that the Muslims were interacting with the kuffar and could present the message of Islam. More people embraced Islam in that 2 years than in the previous 18 odd years. What appeared to be a defeat for the Muslims was a great victory that Allah had decreed, in which Allah clearly says, Inna fatahna laka fathan mubina. Just two things, running out of time, so I'll just mention another. How I mentioned how Ibn al-Jawzi mentioned that it's important for the ulama, the fuqaha, to have knowledge of various sciences. It includes history, specifically in the statement. So as a Muslim, to study history gives us a greater perspective and an insight into the other sciences of Islam. I gave the example of the water. Another example is, historically speaking, Mawlana Abul Hassan Ali Nadwi rahmatullahi mentions this in the biography of Ibn Taymiyyah. So people have very strong feelings of Ibn Taymiyyah. I'm not here to bat for him or against him. I'm only mentioning the historical event. In his time, the Jews descended from the Jews of Khaybar. They came with an old document, and it is purported that this was an exemption from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that these Jews don't have to pay the jizya tax, which the Christians and Jews have to pay the Islamic government. The ulama of the time examined this document, and everything seemed to be in order, and they advised the Amir that it looks like you cannot collect jizya anymore from these Jews. So it's essentially a fiqh issue. Do you collect the jizya from the Jews or not? Ibn Taymiyyah had a look at this document, and one small point he noticed was out. One of the witnesses to this so-called treaty or exemption was Sa'd bin Mu'adh radiallahu anhu. And Ibn Taymiyyah said, listen here, Battle of Khaybar, which year? 7 so-called AH. Sa'd bin Mu'adh radiallahu anhu died at the Battle of Khandaq, which was a year or two before that. How did he get out of his grave to sign this treaty for you Jews? So this is a forgery. So the fatwa was given not on the basis of just fiqh in itself, but based on this historical fact that was history, or knowledge of history was essential to give the correct fatwa. About 2020, during the COVID time, there was a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Somebody contacted me from UK, but essentially it's a Pakistan-based group that, you know, there's this hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam speaks about the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, after which Dajjal will be appearing. So we're setting up this group to discuss these matters. If you want, we can join you in a WhatsApp group, and we'll discuss this for preparation of Dajjal. And this is this thing, whatever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has told us, and it so happens that this hadith actually proved to be reliable. But whether reliable or not, whatever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has taught us, it is for there for us to take lesson. Obviously, every word of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is more valuable in this entire world. But at the same time, obsession over any part of deen and making that the entirety of deen, that is also wadu shayfi ghairi mahaddihi, putting something out of its proper context. Like it's time for my salah, I cannot say, no, I'm a fanatic of Quran, I'm just going to read my Quran. That Quran reading is not going to be ibadah, that will be taking you to Jahannam, because you refuse to read, pray your salah. Any part of deen needs to be in its proper place. So those also who obsess about the prophecies of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and everything needs to be twisted to match a prophecy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that is also dhulm, wadu shayfi, a transgression against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us something, and if it comes true, that proves he's the true Nabi. But we don't change facts and change the hadith to match each other. So this was being promoted by great muftis of Pakistan. And I said, before anything else, we didn't even reach the stage that this hadith was not reliable, but before anything else, this twist in the translation, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions Al Jazeera, which in Arabic historical context is generally what we call today northern Iraq, eastern Turkey, or we can say what is today generally as Kurdistan. That was what the Arabs generally called Al Jazeera, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is mentioning all these place names in this narration about the war with Armenia. So now, to make it fit that the Dajjal's coming tomorrow, these people translated Al Jazeera as Azerbaijan. Whereas Azerbaijan is the complete other end. It is to the east of Armenia. Al Jazeera, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke about, if they had, depending on the authenticity of the hadith, is to the south of Armenia. And this, sorry to say, group of ulama were becoming like a cult in preparing for this, the Dajjal's coming. Whereas, and very senior muftis, I will not mention their names, and we all make mistakes, but simple fact is, know your history of Islam. Where did the Sahaba went? Sahaba entered Al Jazeera, and the history books of Islam mentions Al Jazeera separately, and they mention where the Sahaba went. They also entered north of Iran, which is today Azerbaijan, but these are completely separate areas which anybody with a basic understanding of Islamic history should know and should understand. And if you are weak in Islamic history, you consult those, just like we would consult the Mufti when we don't know, understand the Masala. The Mufti should consult those who understand Islamic history better. So, whether it was Ibn Taymiyyah's fatwa, whether it is these kind of issues of the prophecies of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a general knowledge of Islam, a general knowledge of the history of Islam is absolutely essential for the body of Muslims. Not everybody can be an expert, but for the body of Muslims to have an understanding of Islamic history will save us, whether it's from the Jews falsifying a document, whether it is a cult that's preparing for the Dajjal coming tomorrow and changing the translations of the Hadith. Whatever the case is, a proper grounding in various sciences, such as history, helps protect the central sciences of Quran and Hadith and fiqh. Yes, history is not a central science of Islam, but it is a subsidiary that definitely helps us in our understanding of our deen and in our understanding of our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There has to be a creator behind all these kind of events. We have about 10 minutes left. Gee, brothers, open to you, open to the participants in on the Zoom participants, questions, discussions, comments, please. The weather's gotten normal, so it can't still be frozen.
Surya room, in this lesson, told them, join Christian. Were not the allies of the Muslims. But between the two of them,
I think it's the beginning, start again.
Surya room,
Surah Rum.
like in the lesson told, it's going to be an inside fight between Christians and Muslims. And they should take sides. Be sympathetic. Don't have to
It was Surah Rum was revealed when there was already a battle between the Romans and Persians, and the Muslims felt sympathetic towards the Romans in that they were Ahlul Kitab, and the Quraysh felt sympathetic towards the Persians because they worship fire just like they worship idols. So there was no active participation. The Muslims actually joined in. There was no alliance or so. But it became portrayed in Makkah as an ideological struggle. That it was the Quraysh were using this as propaganda that, look here, fire worshippers are victorious. So this shows that what you're calling as people of revelation, this is something wrong. So this had demoralizing effects. That's why then rather Allah revealed that the Romans will be victorious, and one of the concise battles in when the Romans pushed back the Persians took place on the same day as the battle of Badr. So yeah, no objective. Anybody on the Zoom? No.
Mara mentioned Ibn Khaldun Rahmatullah mentioning about the 4 generations, after about 4 generations, so that if anything mentioned about how process, if you're going to the third or second generation?
I don't know, doesn't come to mind. And the way I understand it, he mentions it as a natural process. If you even expand it further, things shouldn't last actually forever. Fossilization sets in. I'm talking about Islamic movements. The mind becomes solidified. We can't see anything beyond the immediate things that which will maybe set in as temporary measures. People understand that to become permanent. Because if it was something like good in being permanent, then what was the greatest good that ever came to this world is the personality of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Had Allah willed, could Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam not be alive till today? But it's Allah's system that even Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to leave this world. In the Khilafah, Allah wished, Allah decreed that the Khilafah comes to an end after 30 years. Would it have not been khair for us, from my perspective? I would say, hey, continuity from the time of Sayyidina Abu Bakr up till today. But that is my little human mind. But what I can understand as a slave of Allah, that Allah brings about changes, and that if something is going to be continuous and permanent, only permanent is Allah. Any other kind of permanence is going to be a problem. Where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam speaks about Mujaddid, or a guide that comes every century. Implicit in that is that we need a renewal every century. If something's going to continue beyond that century, there is something in there that's going to set in that is going to be problematic. And we can see this. I will not mention the name of the movement, and you can deduce yourself, because if I mention the name, people will misinterpret it. But the past century of Islam, a great amount of work Allah took, and we've all benefited from a certain movement that came in the past century of Islam, which started in the 1920s. A full century has gone past, and we can see major issues. It was a good, great work, and Allah used it. But when it becomes stratified that this work is the deen in itself, and this is going to be permanent, when nothing Allah decrees for us human is permanent, there's changes in Allah's system, but the mentality becomes that this has to be permanent, then certain problems arise. Yeah, so sorry, so maybe I went about on a tangent. So I don't see mentioning any particular remedy. In the greater picture, there shouldn't be fighting the forces of history. I'm putting in quotation marks, or fighting the forces of Taqdeer, depending. Each person is responsible. We can't say, no, Allah decrees this, so it has to go down that way, so let my children go corrupt. That's not what I'm saying. You as a particular each situation, you are still responsible as a parent or grandparent to try and convey the message. Allah decrees that it's going to go downhill in that family. That is a different issue. Again, something, I will mention the place. It is my personal view, but take it in context what I'm saying, and please don't misinterpret that I'm pushing the Muslims in any way, any Muslim in particular, or the Muslim Ummah as a whole, in any way, any ill. Allah save me from that. I'm going to use maybe a very silly example, but years ago I saw in the National Geographic magazine, there was pictures of Libya. All the pictures, sit side by side through the decades. So all the pictures of 1950 and going up the years, and particularly pictures of the people. So you'll see one is that some pictures completely Western dressed, completely women, completely immodestly, un-Islamic dressed, and some pictures complete change, proper Islamic women observing the Sharia. And what was the distinction? The 1950s pictures of Libya was completely westernized. The later pictures of there was more deen. The younger generations had brought more deen in their lives than their grandparents. And you find this in many places, pictures like that of Syria also as well. In many ways, perhaps in South Africa also to a certain extent. It's my opinion. I'm a human, I can be wrong. I believe in my examination of history that there is one particular event, besides all the various factors I've mentioned also about a certain movement of the past century that others used to bring in so many of us. But there is one worldwide focus of all the Muslims that in many ways Muslims become active in one way or the other, and they start to become more deeny through certain current events, certain things that is on the news, but all focus on one particular place and people. That you mention this name and people get excited. This has happened there more than any other place. Same thing can happen anywhere else, but this place, something happens to the Muslims. Muslims throughout the world will always get excited. It is such a tool that draws people, their attention and their hearts. And I believe it's part of the process of drawing people, of awakening people. Anybody understands what I'm talking about? Palestine. So don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that the Nakba, the disaster, and the coming of the Jews is something good and I'm happy at it. And I'm not saying that the current oppression, I'm so happy the Palestinians are being oppressed. Allah forbid, that is not what I'm saying. But what I'm definitely saying as a student of history is, just like the example I've given of Tanzania, for example, how what appears to be bad, but there was victory for Islam. I believe in many ways that the occupation of Palestine has given benefit for the awakening of the minds and the hearts of the Muslims more than any other event of the past century. That things appear downhill, but so many people on the street, and not us, South Africa, America, UK, wherever happens in the world, Masjid al-Aqsa is under attack. It draws people, their attention. And I'm not saying it's the ultimate, but perhaps in Allah's planning, it is one of the ways that our generation, current generation, immediate generations are more attached and more aware of Deen in many ways than 3 generations ago. Other issues of akhlaq of people were better 3 generations, that is the separate topic, but I'm speaking specifically of Islamic awareness is in many ways here because of what appears to be that. The Palestinians themselves, I'm not cursing them, but the fact of the matter is, few generations back, they themselves were not attached to Deen. The average Palestinian activist was socialist, communist, even atheist. It was so amazing. This Layla Khalid, who came a few years ago to Africa, all the aunties in the burqas, the niqabs, running to welcome her and going on that. She has openly said that she has no religion. But just because she's a Palestinian and she wears a scarf, now suddenly make as if she's equal to the auntie of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the Battle of Khandaq. So Palestinians themselves, yes, obviously we feel sympathy, but the reality is also that through the oppression, they have become a nation of deen, which they were not a century ago.
Happened the scheme in Syria, and we know the books, right?
Sorry, when who came to Syria?
When the Tartars and the Mongols were kicking
Yeah,
down in the
okay.
like somebody, right? So now we're thinking it. And everybody's running in the out of where it's they're going to the people for help. What do you remember? You got to look within yourself. Right? This is something that is comes home to you. You can't have a change to the situation if you don't stop it. That's history, right? We're here today. We get a better understanding of the system of our we are blind, we don't.
What I've noticed is that ulama never used to compartmentalize Islam. There was always a appeal to rectify yourselves, but there was also the material appeal that prepare our armies, get our ducks in a row.
Like you asked, generation always then start to wake up. We can't. We have to revere the past. What was the legacy of the past? And that's what is it. And I think, oh, not to write it. The family know brothers. They used to always.
Any closing comments? We've 3 minutes beyond our. Jazakallah everybody for coming in this cold. Allah reward us all. Give us understanding, pardon for any mistakes. Subhanallah bihamdihi. La ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka.
Why you get